welcome to this video from Catherwood Co. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to sew a contoured waistband, which also accompanies the Fonteign Wrap skirt pattern, which you can find in my Etsy shop, which will be linked in the description below. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so following the cutting instructions on the pattern pieces, I have cut out on the fold two number 5s, which is the back waistband, and I've marked my centre backs. And on one of them I've put some interfacing onto the wrong side, and on the other one, because my fabric is I can't see the difference between the right side and the wrong side, I've marked the wrong side. And then I have cut out 4 pieces of number 4, which is the front waistband, and with 2 of those I have put interfacing onto the wrong side. So the interfacing pieces are going to act as a facing for the waistband. Then according to the first part of the instructions, I have finished the side seams of all the, I finished the edges of all the side seams. Okay, so let's go to the first part of the waistband, which is on page 17. So it says, with right sides together, place the waistband on top of the back waistband. So let's just, this is our wrong side, so right side. And I'm going to line up our side seams, wrong side. Okay. I think what I'll do actually, rather than use pins, I'm going to use a couple of clips. Okay, and right side to right side. Okay, and then I'm going to do stitch along these seams with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then I am going to press these seam allowances open. So that is my my front waistband and my back waistband sewn together at the side seams, and I have pressed those seams open. So that's what we're left with. And I've also gone ahead and done the exact same thing to the interfaced waistband, so the waistband facing. Okay, so the next step is to sew these 2 together. So with these right sides together, I will line up the centre backs and the side seams and stitch along this top edge, so the shorter edge. You'll see that your waistband will have a curve to it, so you want to stitch along this curved edge, and you will do that with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Once you've stitched that, we're going to press the seams towards the facing side. Okay, so I've stitched along the top curve, and now we need to press our seam allowances towards the facing, so the interface side. Okay, so there are our seam allowances pressed towards the facing side of the waistband, and now we need to do a row of understitching. And the reason why we do understitching is that when this facing is folded over and we've got the seam like this, it stops this seam from rolling out. So when you're wearing it as the skirt, you won't be able to see this seam rolling out over the top. Okay, so understitching is just sewing another line of stitching through the seam allowances to the facing, and you want to do it as close to your original seam line as possible. So you want to do it within about 1/8 of an inch. So let's go to the sewing machine and do that. So at the sewing machine, we need to try and sew a line of stitching through the seam allowance onto the interface side of the waistband facing, about 1/8 of an inch away from our original seam line. So it doesn't need to be perfect, but if you can line it up as best as you can. If you've got a sewing machine where you can move your needle, that's great. So I can line mine up with the original my needle with the original stitch line, and then just move my needle to the right, if you can do that. Or something else you can do, if you have an edge foot, you can use one of these to line up this plastic guide with your original seam, and then you can turn this to so you can position where you want your needle to be. So let's try that. And because you'll do a lot of understitching in a lot of patterns, maybe getting an edge foot would be a good investment. Okay. I'm just going to lower my needle, see where we are. Okay. And we're going to just sew all the way along parallel to our original seam line, and just take it slowly. Okay, so there is our understitching. So this is our original seam line, and then this is our understitching line. So the next part of the instruction says to fold the raw edge of the waistband facing over by 1 centimeter. So what you'll see, what I've done is I've actually sewn a row of basting stitch, so a long stitch length. I've done it on a 5. So this is going to be a folding guide for me, and I like to do this particularly when I've got a curved edge. It just makes things a lot quicker. And I should have said you can also see our row of understitching here. Now obviously I've done this in a contrasting thread so that you can see. Yours would be in a matching thread, so you won't, once it's actually sewn and folded over, you won't be able to see that row of understitching from the right side of the garment. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead all the way along this raw edge using my basting stitch as a guide and press that up. Okay, so there is our raw edge folded up by 1 centimeter. So we are now on to page 19, where it says, with the right sides together, lay the waistband on top of the skirt piece. So this is just a mock skirt piece that I made. It's not the actual thing. So this is my right side, my centre back, and we want to line the raw edge of our waistband right sides together, not the waistband interfacing but the waistband. And I'm going to start off matching up my centre backs. So with this, you want to make sure your centre backs are lined up and your side seams are lined up. So this is where it's important, if you're making the pleated version of this skirt, that your pleats have been folded correctly. And if they don't match up and they aren't the right size, you will need to readjust your pleats to make sure that your side seams fit. Okay. So because this is a contoured band and we have quite a curve here, we will have to do a small amount of easing just to get these pieces to fit. but you don't want to stretch anything out. So a lot of pins here. Okay, so I'm going to continue to pin all of this together, and then I'm going to sew along with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Okay, so you'll notice here that the waistband is longer than your skirt piece. That's absolutely fine, that's what it needs to be, so don't worry about that. Just keep, as long as your side seams and your centre back match, that is fine. Okay, so here we are with our waistband attached with our side seams matching, and now we need to press these seam allowances up towards the waistband. Now you don't need to finish this edge off, but if you've got a fabric that's fraying a lot, then you may decide that you want to do that to just make sure that the seam is secure. Okay, so now that the seams have been pressed up, the next stage is to mark our buttonhole for the inside button. So the one that you can't see when you're wearing the skirt. So you only want to sew the buttonhole onto the waistband facing, so that when it's folded over, you have the buttonhole visible on the inside, but not on the outside. Okay, so there are buttonhole markings on the pattern pieces, but I would recommend, to make sure you get a good fit, is at this point, fold this over and wrap this around yourself and mark your buttonhole placement, what's good for you, that you get a nice fit. I am just going to, in the middle, because you want it in the middle here, between, these are both 1 centimeter, so in between here in the middle, you want to make a mark. So I'm just going to make a mark here. Let's just say that's my place. And I am going to go and sew this buttonhole. Okay, so at the machine, I've got my buttonhole foot that you will need to do this, and my 10mm button. So I'm going to place my button into the guide and just close that up. Then we need to change our stitch to a buttonhole stitch. So we got 16 to 19 on my machine, and I'm going to go with a number 16. Okay, so you'll see here we got this little I don't know what that is, thingy. So this is my little thingy there that I'm going to pull down, and that basically tells the when to the button foot when to do its thing, basically. So I'm going to line up my my marking that I've made. Okay, find it, line it up in the middle. Make sure my marking's in the middle of the foot as well. What I also want to make sure is that nothing is catching the foot, because if it does, it can send it go a bit haywire. So you could always practice this on a scrap piece of fabric before you actually need to do it. My machine's an automatic buttonhole, so I could press start and it will just do the whole thing. But I'm not going to do that. I like to use the presser foot just to make sure it doesn't have a fit. So let's put the needle down. Just going to bring it up again and put it down. And it's going to go up one side, then zigzag back down that side, move over to the next side and do the same thing. Okay, and that is our buttonhole sewn. So the next thing you need to do is get a seam ripper. Okay, now it's really easy to go wrong here. So the thing to do is, with your seam ripper, poke a hole through one end and move it slightly up, and do the same in the other side. If you try to rip all the way through, you might rip through your stitches at the end. So if you do that and then just gently do that, you won't risk going through there, and that's your buttonhole. Okay, and that's our buttonhole from the other side. So you can see that when we fold this down, you'll only be able to put the button through the facing and not through the outside. Okay, so the next step is to fold the waistband down so that the right side of the waistband, so this, and yeah, the right side of the waistband and the right side of the waistband facing are facing each other. So like this. Okay. And then we need to sew a line of stitching so that it's in line with our front edge piece. Okay. Make sure you get like a good view of this. So now we need to trim off the excess. So I'm going to trim off as close to the seam as I can get and also trim it at the corner. And I've turned it through and I'm going to use a point turner, or you can use something like a blunt knitting needle, something not too sharp, to try and get a good point at that corner. Great, and this is what your two front edges should look like. Once you've turned through both your corners, we need to fold the waistband down so that it covers this stitch line here. Okay, and then we're going to top stitch this into place. So we're going to sew from the right side. So in order to do this, we need to pin this. And we're going to do something in a minute called stitch in a ditch, which is sewing a row of stitching through this seam that we've already sewn, so it's barely visible. So to make sure that we catch our folded edge, I'm going to place a pin through the seam that we sewed earlier, and just make sure that it's catching our folded edge. I'm going to do this all the way along. Okay. Now, once I've done this, I'm going to put some more pins in. Diagonally, and this is going to help keep the waistband from puckering and getting all bunchy, because what can happen is by the end you get like a huge bunch of fabric. So this is going to stop that from bunching up. Okay, so do this along the whole entire length. So at the machine, and we're going to do stitch in a ditch. I've pinned all my waistband around, and as I explained, stitch in a ditch is sewing a line of stitching in this seam that we've already sewn before. So you want to try and make your stitch in a ditch stitching nearly invisible. You shouldn't be able to see it from the outside, and it can be quite tricky. So best thing to do is just take it really slow, line up your seam with your needle, just take it really slow. Here we go, okay. And if you pull the seam slightly apart as you go, that will pull the seam out, so you'll be able to see it a bit easier. Okay, so I'm just going to turn my machine down real slow and see how we get on. is what you'll end up looking like. If I was using a similar coloured thread, then I would like to think that that would be pretty invisible. It'd be difficult to see that stitch in the ditch. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is attach our fittings, and this is just one that I've made for myself. So you can attach with a buckle, or you can attach with a button. And remember to sew your button on for your inside button hole here. Okay, and that is my waistband. Thank you for watching.